Okay, today we're starting our U.S. History 2, The Rise to Independence. And our lesson for today is lesson number 1, One Nation Under God. Amid the rough and tumble of North American colonies of the 1600s, European settlers were determined to make their way. They scrambled for shelter, making houses out of sailcloth, bark, and branches, struggling to stay warm and battling horrific diseases. Days were filled with satisfying their most basic needs. Many perished, but many more came as well, seeking out of hope and promise of a new world. Generations passed, buildings and settlements became more sophisticated, farms were established, and food was more plentiful. In the mid-1700s, where our story begins, the 13 British colonies were forging their identity and would soon become their own nation. Day by day, these diverse citizens lived and grew alongside one another, becoming a novel and unique population, the American people. Throughout this unit, we will look through the window of history and witness revolution, war, and ultimately the birth and development of a new nation. Did you know that in early colonial times, people did not know as much about diseases and germs as we do now? In fact, people rarely bathed because they thought that a thick layer of dirt on their skin would protect them from diseases. Without running water, electricity, clean paved roads, and washing machines, you can imagine that life in the colonial times was a bit dirtier than it is today. European colonization in North America, the late 16th century. To understand what was happening in this corner of the world, we first need some background. European countries like England, France, and Spain had been claiming land all over what we now know as North America and establishing colonies there. However, problems arose because of disputes over particularly desirable land, as well as borders between territories. Add to this the indigenous peoples, or I say Indians, who had been there long before any Europeans, and conflict was inevitable. The French and Indian War. Skirmishes arose between the French and the English throughout the first half of the 17th century until an all-out war erupted in 1756. During the following 7 years, this war was also known as the 7-Year War, France and England fought bitterly alongside their respective indigenous allies. The British emerged triumphant in 1763 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, while France gave up virtually all of its North American territory. Victory in this war, along with rapid population increase in its 13 colonies, cemented Britain's position of power in North America. The 13 British colonies along the eastern coast of North America were growing rapidly as immigrants from Europe sought freedom and a fresh start. While the majority of colonists were from England, there were also immigrants from other European countries, such as Holland and Germany. Drawn to the colonies with a spirit of adventure and courage, colonists settled in America for 3 main reasons. One was religious freedom. Many people disagreed with the King of England, George II, about religion. The Pilgrims and the Puritans were 2 groups who were tired of being forced to participate in the Church of England, as they felt it didn't reflect the church pictured in the Bible. Many relocated to different parts of Europe and eventually to the colonies to escape persecution and to practice Christianity in the way they believed was right. 2. Fleeing difficult circumstances. Famine and war made Europe in the 1700s a tough place to live. For example, sheep were being raised instead of crops to eat because wool fetched a higher price. As a result, there wasn't enough food to go around. 3. The land of opportunity. England encouraged both immigration, which means leaving from England, and immigration, entering. to the colonies. There were new opportunities for farming, business, and land ownership in the colonies. Although the 13 colonies were all under British rule, they were actually very different from one another. They were split into 3 groups by geographic location. Let's take a look at what they were like. The New England colonies were Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. They were established mainly by people from Britain seeking religious freedom. Puritans who wanted to reform the Church of England from within, and separatists who wanted to completely separate from the English Church. Ironically, they often weren't welcoming to those who believed differently than themselves. These were people who were very involved in the communities and churches. They were often skilled laborers and made products such as boat parts, fabrics, and tools. New England had several safe harbors, so trade and fishing were an important part of their economy. There were farms meant to feed just one family, but not an agriculture on a large scale. The Middle Atlantic colonies were New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. This area was known for being accepted of different walks of life. This is probably because it was more diverse than the New England colonies when immigrants from other European countries such as Holland, Sweden, and Germany came. Agriculture was the main industry because of the mild climate and fertile land. Not only did they provide food for the colonies, but they also sold much of it to Europe. The southern colonies, depending mainly on farming, a few select crops such as tobacco and rice. Their growing season was almost year-round due to their climate, and they provided agricultural products to the Middle and New England colonies. These colonies were established with the purpose of making money, both for the landowners and for England. They had few cities or schools. Because they weren't settled by a specific religious group, they too were more tolerant of diverse beliefs. While slavery was commonplace in all of the colonies, there were more slaves in the southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, and Georgia, because the huge southern plantations or farms used slave labor. You should know the colonies also grew in number because of the slave trade. It is estimated that the transatlantic slave trade sent somewhere between 10 to 12 million enslaved African Americans to the colonies between the 16th and 19th century. As you can see, each group of colonies had its own unique environment. What they did share, however, was a strong desire to maintain their freedoms and to make decisions for themselves. This was the main factor that would lead them to put aside their differences and unite against Britain. Now that we have an idea of the circumstances in North America in the 1760s, we are better prepared to unpack some of the details in the weeks to come. Before we get to more of those details, let's take a moment to consider an important question. Why we study history. Have you ever wondered why you study history? How does something that happened hundreds of years ago apply to your life? We are going to learn about some amazing people and events throughout this study, but they are more than just good stories. They are the opportunity to see our loving God at work throughout the past. Looking in the rear view mirror. 1 Corinthians 10:11 tells us, "Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instructions, on whom the end of the ages has come." This passage is referring to the story of the Israelites being delivered from Egypt. It was written down so they could learn from it forever. When we study history, we get the advantage of seeing how things turned out. This is called retrospect, and it just means to look backward. Documenting history and taking the time to learn from those who have gone before us can save us from having to learn the hard way. Isn't God good? He gave us this model of writing down history as a remembrance for the generations to come. He doesn't waste a thing. He can use even the hard times of our lives to spare someone else who might learn from our mistakes. Number 2, gaining understanding. In studying history, you deepen your understanding. Have you ever spoken to your grandmother or looked at a picture of a long ago relative and recognized something of yourself in their personality or smile? If you have, you are seeing your roots, where you came from. When you study history, you have the chance to do something similar on a much larger scale. Looking back, can you give the opportunity to a better understand the present? You have the opportunity to do that. As you start to recognize the reasons why things are the way they are, you are better equipped to see the bigger picture in front of you. Number 3, discovering identity. As you've learned, most of the inhabitants of the colonies were from England, and the leaders in positions of power were all men. However, when you talk about the formation in the United States, there are many other people groups that need to be acknowledged. The African people who were brought over against their will as slaves, colonial women, as well as indigenous peoples, made important contributions to the melting pot that created a new and distinct culture, sometimes referred to as national identity. When we learn about the peoples and culture that made up our nation, we learn more about who we are. This is called our heritage. On the horizon, as you take this trip through the birth and early years of the American nation, you will get to experience the thrill of history being made. This was a turbulent time, full of unknown outcomes and colorful characters. We begin our lesson in the British colonies, about 10 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. You will come to understand why the colonies were fed up with the British rule and why they were so willing to fight for their independence. This will lead you up to the moment of the Revolutionary War, when it starts, and take you through some of the shocking and terrible battles fought between the British and the colonists. You will hear stories of bravery and deception, loss and unity. How will this separate and very different colonies come together to form the United States of America? When the war finally winds down, you will come alongside the leaders of this new nation as they seek to establish a new country, learning from their colonial past and hoping not to make the same mistakes. You will explore new territory as the people of America head west, coming up with new innovations along the way to make their lives and work easier. Unfortunately, war isn't completely behind them, so you will delve into the Second War for Independence and learn how the further strengthening of the United States. You will discover the meaning behind American symbol and important documents and meet a diverse cast of individuals of varying ethnicities, belief, religions, and economy class who come together in a most extraordinary manner to form the United States of America, one nation under God. This completes our lesson 1 for today.